All right, welcome back to the program. My guest is joining me right now virtually. He is Adeyemi Adediran. He's a partner commercial practice at Anderson. Good morning to you, Mr. Adediran. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Nancy. I'm
Hi.
very well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get started. In understanding the Finance Act, which has been suspended now, or the executive orders, let me get your clarification first. Is it 2022 Finance Act or is 2023 Finance Act? Because we know that the first Finance Act, I think, was done in 2020, but it was tagged
Yes.
2019 Finance Act. So please clarify the issue of these dates.
Well, going by the name of the document itself that was assented by President Muhammadu Buhari, it's 2023 Finance Act. But I understand your question because, 2019 Finance Act was signed on 13th January 2020, but it was still called Finance Act 2019. So what we expected was that this Finance Act that should have been signed earlier in the year, going by the president for earlier years, was signed in May 28, 2023. And ordinarily, if you go by the nomenclature, would have expected it to be named 2022 Finance Act. But if you go by the name of the document itself, it's 2023 Finance Act. But I don't think that really matters. What matters is the provisions of the act and its impact on the economy and taxpayers.
Yes, why I asked that question is for correct labeling, especially in the
Okay.
media, and perhaps for some of us that are involved in speaking about this all the time. Now, let me get your sentiments regarding the executive orders signed by President Tinubu just a few days ago, precisely last week. Four executive orders. Can you speak to me about your sentiments, and can you also break it down for our viewers?
Yeah, I've always advocated the need for the government to look at all the finance acts that have been enacted into law since 2020, and look at them and look at the provisions to see if they are consistent with the policy direction of the new government. If you look at the 2019 Finance Act, it was a welcome development because our tax laws hadn't been updated for several years before that time. And what that act really did was to provide clarification on a number of issues that had been bothering taxpayers, and introduce certain incentives that made the tax system a lot simpler. But between 2019 and now, or 2020 and now, what we found out is that the Finance Act had been majorly focused on showing up the revenue of the government, But I always say that before you can tax, you have to tax profit. Before you can show up revenue, what you have to tax is profit. But if you try to take taxes top of the line, then it becomes burdensome to the taxpayers, and they may seek other jurisdictions to play. Now, going back to to the issue of the executive order, the executive orders are they are a step in the right direction, because it's consistent with the recommendation of the Tax Policy 2017 that says that before an act should take effect, especially a tax new amendment to the tax law should take effect, then you should wait for about 90 days or more, so that the impact on taxpayers can be well understood before it's even implemented. Now, if you look at the 2023 Finance Act, right, that became public sometime in June, but was already signed by the government on May 28th, 2023. What that meant was that taxpayers would have been doing catch up, because as at June 1st, they didn't even have copies of the law that had already taken effect. So suspending the commencement of the Finance Act based on that executive order that varied the date is the right step in the right direction. And I think that the time between now and September 1st, where it is proposed to take effect, will allow the government to properly engage taxpayers, engage other stakeholders on what the laws actually mean or the impact on businesses. Or they can even sit down and introduce other amendments that they seek that will be consistent with their own policy. Because I hear the presidential advisor on revenue saying that the focus of this government is to tax production and not consumption. And that's good thinking because companies have to make profit first. They have to be successful in the business climate for you to actually improve your tax collection. So that idea or that mindset is commendable.
Okay, let's go back to the Finance Act, which now has been reviewed by Mr. President as a result of that announcement. What position does it leave Finance Act 2023? Is it that Mr. President will send another one in the form of a bill now to the National Assembly, and will they tweak it? Will we have a new Finance Act for 2023?
Yeah, so what I think is if you look at the provision of the Finance Act 2023, it actually empowers the president, to vary the commencement date. And I don't think the government would have suspended the commencement date just for the sake of suspending it. With the introduction of the Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, I expect between now and September 1, there will be some suggestion in respect to tax reforms. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that the Finance Act is still an act. The government did not repeal it, neither have they made any amendment to it. What they've simply done is to suspend the commencement. So, but I believe the federal government will liaise with the legislators, to see what amendments or what new introduction in terms of policy can be made to ameliorate the impact of these acts on businesses. Don't forget that when this government came into place, they went into action and made certain policy pronouncements: the removal of the fuel subsidy, the harmonization of the exchange rates. The twin impact of those two pronouncements, is companies are still adjusting to those. So I think the right thing to do is to study not just Finance Act 2023, but other Finance Acts before now and see, okay, what new introduction can we make, or what policy document can we issue in conjunction with the National Assembly that will ameliorate the impact of these decisions on taxpayers and businesses. That's what I expect.
Okay. Out of the 4 executive orders that Mr. President signed, which one would you say, or is it all that you think would have impact on businesses? There is a 5% suspension, telecoms tax, also excise duties are there. Which one of them would you say would really impact businesses, or all? And I would really even want you to break them down sufficiently in a way that our viewers would understand the impacts. That's one part of the question. Then the second part, Yemi, is would you consider these executive orders that were signed by President Tinubu a few days ago as palliatives, sort of, to ameliorate the impact of petrol subsidy on businesses, as it were? Because if you take a look at Nigeria, MSMEs, in fact, nano and micro make up majority of the businesses in Nigeria, and those categories of businesses use generators to power their various businesses. I try pass my neighbor, for example, businesses use that petrol. So do you think that these executive orders are in a way palliatives?
Okay, thanks, Nancy, for that question. I'll try and connect the two questions. The first question you said is a breakdown of the executive order and what do they mean, to the common man. In bringing this to life, I had a friend who wanted to buy a car, some few days ago, and the guy he was engaging to buy that car was telling him that, hey, you really need to buy this car quickly because customs duties are rising, and the cost that I've given you 3 months ago is not going to be the cost anymore if you want to buy it now, Those are real life. That's a real life example of the impact of these laws that were enacted by the past administration towards their dying days. So if you look at the Finance Act, some of the provisions, the key provisions of the Finance Act, and how it impacts businesses. First, I would say that the one that comes to mind easily is the increase in education tax from 2.5% to 3%. This rate was 2% before the commencement of the Finance Act generally. But over the years, it moved from 2% to 2.5% to 3%. Um, another provision of the Finance Act is the removal of what we call investment allowance on purchase of plant and machinery, and equipment by businesses. Now, if you take these two for example, if the government suspends Finance Act and it says it takes effect in September 1, as a business, if I'm going to be filing my returns between now and then, rather than paying 3.3% on education tax, I'll be paying 2.5% on education tax. That's more money to the business that can be used for other things. In terms of investment allowance, if I'm buying an equipment, what the Finance Act has said is that, hey, I'm no longer giving you, the government is no longer giving you this incentive, this 10% investment allowance on purchase of plant and equipment. Now, as a business, if my equipment is still at the port, on the verge of being cleared for business, and I put it to use now, I can claim that incentive if my returns are to be filed before September 1st. That's a real positive impact on business. The other one was the introduction of the 0.5% levy on the importation of goods, outside Africa, and that was a huge one for businesses because by the Finance Act had already taken effect 28th of May 2023, and businesses were just knowing in June that, hey, the cost of importing things from outside Africa to Nigeria had increased, by this 0.5% of the levy. Now, suspending that means that the government is looking at other creative ways to meet their obligations to international organizations, and because that's the intention of that 0.5%. Now, there are some allowances that were introduced, by the Finance Act. For instance, if you pay life insurance premium for yourself and your spouse, you are entitled to an allowance on that life insurance premium. But looking at the Finance Act generally, also another allowance that was introduced was if there's a capital loss on assets, on disposal of assets, you can use that capital loss, as a deduction on any other sale of assets. That wasn't there before now. Now, but if you look at the Finance Act generally, it wasn't, the net impact was more taxes were going to be paid by businesses as opposed to incentives. So to your next question, which is is this suspension, is it a form of palliative? Um, yeah, I would say yes in a way because anything that brings some form of succor to businesses or taxpayers, can be seen as a cushioning effect, and I think that's what these executive orders really mean for day-to-day transactions as it relates to individuals and as it relates to businesses. Now, that doesn't take away the fact that the government needs to look at other incentives or other palliatives that they can introduce that would, have more impacts on the day-to-day lives of Nigerians. But this is a positive step in the right direction.
Now, Yemi, is the time that has been given enough? Because we've seen a deferment of commencement of dates from what Mr. Tinubu signed, the president. Is the time enough? Should we ask for longer time as Oliver Twist, or should businesses actually call for a complete reversal like some associations are already calling for?
Hmm. Yeah, what I would say is that, first of all, from a legal perspective, the Finance Act is an act of parliament. Is a law that was produced by representatives of the people. So ordinarily, the president cannot annul or annul, as it were, the Finance Act based on an executive order. It still has to go through the legal framework and the legal processes that have been set in place for amendment of laws. But what I would say is that there's this adage that says, if you want to get something done, you give it to a busy person. It all depends on what the government seeks to achieve. The government has given 3 months. They've set up a committee on tax reforms and fiscal policy. I expect that between now and then, the government should be able to um, provide or introduce new provisions or make some other directives, that would align with their own policy direction. Because if you look at what, like I said, you don't tax businesses till they exit the country. What you need to focus on is the business climate, the business environment, the ease of doing business. If you focus on that and businesses thrive, they will earn enough profits, that would actually make them pay more tax. And then government will be able to meet their obligations, whether it's loan or whether improvement of infrastructures and social amenities. So that's the way I see it. Whether the time is enough or not depends on what the government seeks to achieve.
Should, if you take a look at even you talked about the business climate, and I would like to get your view as to the reforms you would like to see to ease doing business in Nigeria, because many businesses are saying that even despite Mr. President's reforms, that we are seeing snippets of it, yet we would like to see holistic reforms being put to place, that businesses are still gasping for breath right now. I would like you to speak on that, on some other areas of ease of doing business reforms that businesses would like to see.
Okay, so what I would say is that government has needs. The government needs more tax revenues to be able to meet their obligations, right? And there are two ways you can go about it. You can either introduce additional taxes or you can expand the tax nets. That means you focus on existing taxes and you ensure that those that are not paying are actually paying their taxes, and you introduce tools and social awareness, to those that are not paying their taxes, to be able to comply in a simple manner. So what I would say is that this government has taken a direction to focus on existing taxes and how they can make it more efficient. At least so far, that's the body language that I see, to make it more efficient and to make sure that people comply with it. I understand some misgivings with respect to the renewal of ownership of vehicle license,
Yeah.
where people say that this should not be introduced every year. Once you've paid for 1 year, then it should last throughout the life cycle of the car. Yes, I believe this government is listening, and I hope that they will be able to make changes. Now, coming back to tax reforms in general, studies have shown that countries where you have governments providing um, social amenities, good roads, good hospitals, good education. What has been reported is that citizens of those countries actually pay tax voluntarily. And I think the first place to start is a place of trust and certainty. What happened with the last Finance Act was that it introduced a bit of uncertainty because there were fundamental changes that were being introduced year in, year out that made it difficult for businesses to plan. Now that needs to be looked into so that the business community can have a bit of certainty with respect to taxes that they need to pay, to whom they should pay to, and proper dispute resolution mechanism being put in place where they can trust the system such that if they pay more tax than they should, that those taxes can easily be recovered. So that needs to be simplified. Then, of course, I know the people would, in the next few years, will begin to demand for dividends of democracy, as it were, in terms of, okay, where are the improvements to schools, where are the improvements to to the roads and other social amenities. Now, if government are able to meet that, in creating a better condition of living for citizens, they will be willing to part with more tax. But looking at the tax administration angle itself, I think harmonizing the taxes that we currently have. In the past, what we've done is that, hey, we have a problem with the police. Okay, we introduce the police trust fund. Okay, we need this telecommunication sector is booming. Okay, we need more taxes there. We introduce telecommunication tax. Oh, there's another tax, Naseni levy. There are about report says that there are 41 or more
Yeah,
taxes,
in the
that Nigerians
telecoms.
pay. Some are formal, some are informal. So
Mm.
there is an urgent need to harmonize all these taxes and make it simplify it such that a taxpayer that wants to pay can easily pay. I've had business people call me to say, okay, I want to pay my tax. I don't want the government to disturb me in future. How do I go about it? Is that information easily out there? Are there channels where people can walk into and get this information on how they can actually comply with their tax obligations? So those are issues that the government should look into, such that as they are seeking to play their part in meeting the needs of the citizens are well aware of their obligations and they are meeting those as well.
Mm. Do you think that what the president did to put together a presidential task force on tax reforms, headed by perhaps one of your colleagues in the industry too, though you have Anderson, he's of PwC, Taiwo Yedele, who is a seasoned tax expert and also a friend of the show. Do you think that that is, a game changer in terms of perhaps the government now trying to have a holistic view as to reforming the tax administration in Nigeria?
Yeah, I smiled when you said tax force. I don't think it's a tax force, because when
A
Nigerians
fiscal policy,
hear, yeah, I think it's a committee on fiscal policy and
fiscal
tax reform.
policy, yeah.
And I think it's the right step in the right direction. What the government is saying is that, unlike the past where there's little or no engagement with respect to when government wants to introduce new laws, and we are all scrambling for the provisions or the amendments that have been introduced, what the government is really communicating to the citizens is that I hear your concerns about multiple taxation, about the tax burden, and I want to get it right. So I am setting up a committee with professionals to look at this broadly and advise me on how to get this right. Government is not oblivious of their needs, to increase tax revenue, but they are saying to themselves that, okay, how do I do this in a way that will not introduce additional burden to the taxpayers? So setting up the committee, it's is a welcome development, and it's one that I applaud the government for. And the next thing we'll then see, okay, what would what kind of advice or what kind of policy will come out from the committee, that will impact the citizens. I am hopeful that whatever work the committee does is going to have a positive impact on the economy, and I think the government made the right decision in doing that.
If we take a look at all our taxes or in the value chain of tax administration in Nigeria, where do you think we really have the greatest challenge? Is it the multiplicity of taxes? Is it tax collection? Is it tax generation? Because you may say that you may generate something, but you collect something else. The accounts may show you that you generated like 10 million in taxes, but when you go to collect, through perhaps hanky-panky or shenanigans, the person may just say, or even tax consultants can even work with businesses, okay, give us 2 million, we'll know as we'll go do them. But it's on paper there that you've generated so amount of money, 10 million, meanwhile you've collected 3 million naira. So is it really a challenge of tax collection or generation or tax multiplication or even the tax morale of Nigerians? Then what else again?
Yeah.
Administration is also coming to my head, but whatever it is, you are the expert. So speak to me about that.
Okay, yeah, I think is a bit of everything. And we've had some progress in the past few years when it comes to tax administration and compliance. What the government has done, especially for the formal sector, is to introduce the use of technology. Now you can file your returns 9 p.m. on 29th of June, even if the deadline is 30th of June for companies with year end of 31st December. You can do that because the technology affords you to do that and allows you to upload your tax returns electronically. So I think that eases tax burden for the compliance burden for the taxpayer, and for the FRS, it also reduces um, the cost of compliance or the cost of collection. And the net impact of that is more revenue for the government. The other areas I think we need to get right is in terms of dispute resolution when it comes to tax audits and the multiple agencies that are looking at the same thing or the same or different taxes on the same revenue. So today you have FRS looking at CIT, common income tax, and looking for exposures. You have MANFAC doing the same thing. You have EFCC doing the same thing. You also have, in some cases, the National Assembly doing the same thing. We need to get rid of all of that. We need to simplify the administration, and ensure that only one agency, and once that agency has looked at the compliance requirement of the company, that settles it. If another agency requires clarification, it can meet with the government agency that is saddled with that responsibility, to get the tax position of the government. So we need to do away with that so that businesses can focus on their core business. The other area that is important for us to look at is dispute resolution. A taxpayer must be confident that if I have an issue with the FIRS and I approach the FIRS, that issue is resolved not just amicably but in good time. And if I approach the courts, the courts will interpret it based on the provisions of the tax laws, and I can get judgments swiftly, you know. So we need to improve that area. Taxpayers should not also shy away from seeking amends, in the courts. That deepens our tax system and ensures that the tax authority is also on their toes when they audit or look at companies' books. So we need to actually resolve that. More importantly, which I said, what is going to actually have more impact is voluntary compliance from taxpayers. So we need taxpayer education, even in the interland. The FRS is doing something with the VAT Act,
Mm,
partnering with the markets
okay.
association, yeah, marketers and traders association. I mean, that's a good step in the right direction because you are going to the informal sector. You are telling them, see, let's formalize this thing so that when government wants to issue or introduce palliatives, they have a data to work with. And if you are not required to pay VAT, we would work with the data that you've given us and exempt you accordingly. That's a good way to go about it, rather than knocking on doors and locking businesses. Those form of partnership, improves and encourages taxpayers to pay their taxes and have more confidence in the system. So I think we've made some progress in the past few years in that aspect with the introduction of technology, and I think we started it well again with this new administration.
Yeah, let me get your view as to the proposed measure that has been looked at by the Policy Advisory Council, as it were. There are talks out there as to the measure of NIMASA, FIRS, and customs as the Nigeria Revenue Service. What do you think? Some would say NIMASA is an agency regulating the shipping business activities in Nigeria, not necessarily a revenue generating agency. But the policy council has said a Nigerian Revenue Service to collect both direct and indirect taxes. What do you think about this? A measure of the three bodies?
Yeah, so I would say um, what the government is seeking to do is not new. It's what obtains in some jurisdictions, right? You don't have multiple agencies collecting different taxes or levies, for the government. And what the government is looking at, I know it has not come into force, but it's the news are there that the government is looking at that. And I think if that is done, it's going to drive efficiency in terms of collection, and it's going to actually reduce the cost of administration, because now you have one agency as opposed to three. Having said that, I know that there may be legal hurdles that the government needs to surmount, because all these agencies are actually functioning based on acts of parliament, meaning that the National Assembly were the one that constituted them based on the discussions and deliberations of the representatives of the people. But the government would then need to send those um, amendments that they seek to those acts to the National Assembly, and then we see how that goes. But in terms of promoting efficiency, ease of collection and accountability, I think it's consistent with what is obtainable in other efficient jurisdiction, even in Africa. You don't have situations where you have FRS collecting CIT and corporate taxes, and then you have state government collecting personal income tax. So in some jurisdictions. So I think that thought is consistent with that idea that how can governments improve efficiency in collection of revenue.
Mm. Perhaps they are looking at also the UK model, which has His Majesty's Customs. Is it Revenue and Customs? They call it,
Yeah,
HM Revenue and Customs. But perhaps when we
it's
get to that
okay.
bridge, yes, we'll cross it. But lastly, you did speak
Absolutely.
about the 10% investment allowance earlier. I would like to ask you as we close, and very briefly, if you think that this may really attract even new businesses, or yes, if we will attract new businesses, if it's we keep those that are existing on ground, or perhaps if it would also bring businesses that have closed down. If we had something like this, will businesses like Game and ShopRite, have, exited the country?
Yeah, yeah, without prejudice to the entire business environment, the ease of doing business generally in Nigeria. We look at those incentives that were existing in tax laws. Personally, for investment allowance, I would have said what the lawmakers should have considered is maybe a reduction of that allowance from 10% to say 5% or even 3%, as opposed to removing the incentive in its entirety. But more importantly, I think what the government needs to do is to actually do a research on the impact of all the incentives that are existing in our various laws on the businesses that they are targeted at. Because government is losing revenue by giving these incentives. The question is, are the businesses actually promoting the economy? Is the economy getting positives with respect to these incentives that are given to businesses? So we need to look at it holistically. And when we do that, we will then be able to say, okay, what kind of incentives should we introduce that will attract foreign direct investment, that will ease the tax burdens, and at the end of the day, generate jobs, improve the economy, improve revenue and profits of companies,
Okay.
and at the end of the day, improve taxes.
Thank you very much, Yemi. So many incentives, but we really need to put them all together. There is a tax, road tax, tax credits scheme also for
Yeah,
roads. You see NNPC
yeah.
is trying to get its own. Dangote is also doing its own. Private sector is latching on all that. But perhaps that will be a different conversation for another day. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I've
Bye-bye.
been I've been speaking with Adeyemi Adediran, who is a partner commercial practice at Anderson. We've been looking at President Tinubu's executive orders, 4 of them, and the Finance Act that has been suspended, but perhaps will be reviewed as soon. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please join us again tomorrow for another edition of the show. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. Bye now.